morning, Happy New Year. Those who have not seen today, but those who have seen, one more time, Happy New Year. I mean, I don't think it's getting old, so you can repeat it many times.
All day.
Yeah, and maybe all week. So, slowly but surely we are in more than half of the Bible through. So today we are in the Gospel of Mark, not Mork.
I'm not gonna let you forget that.
No.
So second Gospel, two things about that. When we talk about authorship, is usually, as I wrote in the handout that you have, it's unknown in the sense that Gospel itself does not give any hints who wrote it. Okay? Unlike, for example, Luke begins. This is me, Theophil, good friend of mine. I began the investigation, and so on and so forth. In the Gospel of John, we have the hints on the disciple who loved Jesus, and then he is within the Gospel. He is identified as John, so we know who that is. With the Gospel of Mark, we do not have any serious hints, but the reason why we have it as a Gospel of Mark is all the copies that we have, okay, all the scrolls that we have either of Mark, kata Markon in Greek, or it's Gospel of Mark. So the name is there, and critical scholarship debates about that, and is he the real one or is he not the real one? I don't think there is a reason to seriously debate. We see in the Gospel of Mark two things. Thing number one is there is a kind of important accent on the activities of Peter. And more than in any other gospel. And that kind of links it together with what happened with John Mark that we find in the book of Acts, when, for unfortunate dispute between Paul and John Mark, they part their ways, and Paul selects another helper or disciple as his assistant, and they travel together. And then we see a closer relationship between John Mark and Peter. And that's one of the things. But yet, on the other hand, there is no a real chasm between two missionary groups. And Paul mentions Mark in Colossians 4:10. And when he mentions him, he kind of brings two stories together, and that's important. Mark by itself means consecrated to Mars, okay, to the god of war. And we would think, how would a devoted Christian guy or the guy who would believe in Jesus get such a name? Well, first of all, he got his name before he became a devoted Christian. That's thing number one. Thing number two is we kind of had that similar experience. We had this. We saw the similar story, not identical but similar, when we've talked about the book of Esther. Okay, who is the uncle of Esther? Okay, Mordecai. Everybody remember that. Okay, yeah. So what the name Mordecai comes from? It's dedicated to god Marduk. Okay, now thinking about that, that's even more odd than Markian name. Because he is listed as one of those Jews that came or were released after exile, being brought into exile as a child or youth. So that means he used to live in Judea with that kind of name. Okay? So even before the temple was destroyed, his parents apparently gave him the name dedicated to Marduk. It's like, that's interesting, So when you put those names together, it sometimes it gives you a very interesting, observations or parallels. Now, if we think about the structure, I gave you two ones. So one is more geographically oriented. When we begin with John the Baptizer, and then we have Galilean ministry, and then Jesus goes out of the Galilee, but he's not on his way to Jerusalem yet. And then from chapter 8, right? Yes, 8:27 to 10:52, there is like basically 3 chapters. It's a whole journey, Mark describes how he goes through, and that's where 3 times Jesus discusses the question, not a question, he kind of warns them. I am going to Jerusalem, and I'm going to be betrayed, and that's what will happen with me. And it's very interesting to see the progression of what disciples begin to understand. At first, they basically yell and scream, no way, it's not going to happen, no, don't do it, da da da. Then the other one is kind of met in silence. And the third one is very more funny, even than interesting. After third time, when Jesus mentions that, the mother of 2 of his disciples comes and says, can you let them, when you will be in your glory, can you let one sit on one hand and another one at another? And we kind of laugh at her, but think about that. That means, I don't know about the guys, but she got it. She is going to be glorified to the state where 2 of her sons would be able to, in her mind, would be able to see it in his glorious kingdom. But the glorious kingdom is achieved only through death and then resurrection. So it's like, there were people who were at least slowly but surely kind of taking the pieces of the puzzle and putting them together. It's very, very interesting. Very interesting. And then, so the last part of that is, so travel to Judea and Jerusalem, and then, of course, what's going on in Jerusalem. Okay, the other one, thematical outline, okay, I kind of adjusted it from Dr. Wells, and Dr. Wells' commentary on 16 chapters of Mark look like this short pamphlet. So if you want to study that, fine. I didn't bring last time the commentaries on Matthew. On Matthew is about the same, plus 1 more volume. So it's a 3-volume on Matthew. But I mean, it's 28 chapters and this is 16, so it makes sense, right? No, it doesn't. Actually, the last chapter here, written by Christopher Mitchell, you might remember this name. We've talked about him when we talked about 8 chapters of Song of Songs. And the guy wrote like I think it's 1,200 pages commentary on the Song of Songs, 8 chapters. So, yeah, we have guys who are somewhat, I don't know, worthy, in good sense. In good sense, yeah. So, but here I kind of adjusted what Val says, and I think, if you think about this thematically, in the middle, let me put it to the board. So we have A, B, C, and then B prime and A prime. And the important thing that we have an introduction, 1 through 8, and then as an introduction to how the kingdom is going to be established, we have a realization of that, and that's in chapters 11, 1 through 16. Okay, so we have the beginning of the gospel, and that's how the gospel begins. In the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that's how it ends, how it realizes, and it realizes in the, of course, in the seizing, and then he comes as the king, but king who is not going to recruit his servants, but he's going to serve them. And then second thing is there is a Galilean ministry. So that's 9 to 8:26. Galilean ministry, and then 8, 31 to 10:52. It's kind of similar to the geographical one. So you go toward Judea. So the geographical objects are important for those two parts. And in the middle is we have very short passage is Confession of Peter. And I believe that that's a central point, and everything goes to it. Then Peter confesses Christ as the Son of the living God, and then everything reverses and goes down. Not goes down in the bad sense, like goes south. Not in that sense. It's just, kind of changes. So that's kind of like a hinge on which everything turns. So the whole gospel is basically revolves around the confession of Peter. So that means we need to understand who he is confessed. So let's go to Mark chapter 8, verses 27, to 30. And we've talked about this last time, that unlike in the Gospel of Matthew, where we have, "You are the Christ, Son of the living God," and then Jesus adds a lot of things. This is not flesh and blood who opened it to you. So giving these ideas of flesh and blood, in Matthew we can see that Jesus is more into a sacrificial system. He is more of a priest or a high priest. He is more confessed as the Son of Man in the Gospel of Matthew. Here, Peter, what we see from Mark, how Mark describes it, he says, "You are the Christ." Okay? The Christ is a messianic term. And one of the main places where where's my marker? Anybody sees my black? Yeah, sorry, my bad. Any place where we need to go to look for an understanding of who Messiah is Psalm 2. Okay? It is in Psalm 2, it says, "Why do the nations rage, and why do the peoples quarrel against Yahweh, against the Lord?" And usually it is translated. Let's see how it's translated in our stuff. Like in ESV, most of the time it is against his anointed. Okay? So Psalm 2. Okay, in Psalm 2, "Why do the nations rage? Why do the peoples plot in vain?" Okay, "The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against." Okay, two things. So we have, in Psalm 2, it is important to notice those pairs. So the nations, the peoples, the kings, the rulers, they set up against the Lord, okay, and his anointed. Saying, whatever they say is not important at this point. The thing is that the word for anointed is Christ. That's the same word. Okay? I don't understand why translators did not do this kind of consistency thing. Okay? In Greek, it's Christ. In Hebrew, it's Mashiach. Okay? So they actually argue against Yahweh and against Mashiach. He is Mashiach. Okay? So that's an important thing. So when we read Psalm 2, we understand that that's the guy who comes as the king, as the true ruler against those rulers that are opposing the Yahweh, the God creator. Okay? The God of life, actually. So it is important to understand that in the Gospel of Mark, we see Jesus as the king. Okay? It does not mean that in Gospel of Matthew there are no images as Jesus as the king. There are in other Gospels, but in Mark, he is primary the king. Okay? We very often talk that he came and fulfilled three ministries: the priest, the king, and the prophet. Okay? And in Matthew, he is the priest or high priest. In Mark, he is the king. In Luke, we'll talk about this in a week or two, he is the prophet. Okay? He travels a lot, even more than here. Okay? So it is important to see him as a king and as a ruler. Therefore, did I do it this way? Yes. So let's go to 1045. The kind of statement of his rule is given in the verse that I gave you as a memory verse. Okay? 1045 in Mark is again it's kind of at the very end of discussion on the rule, and what he says is, so within the context of request of James and John, he says that like the ruling factor is a regular category within the realm of other nations, Gentiles, and they like to rule or lord over somebody. But within you it should not be that way. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Again, so he kind of summarizes everything that was said before. This 3 times he mentions that he is going to, when he's coming to Jerusalem, he is going to be arrested and he is going to be humiliated. He's going to die, but he's going to rise again. Okay? But the way to this rise again comes through service, not through, you cannot grab this power. It's the only way. And that's important to see that he comes as a king, as the one who serves. And therefore, at the very end, when we'll come to the very end, we see the signs of the rule that he gives to his disciples. So let's go to chapter 16. In chapter 16, it's very interesting again, that when unlike in other, we do not see it in any other gospel. Okay, and unlike critics, I would say, so that makes a difference, and therefore it's a later, whatever insertion, blah blah blah, all of that nonsense. No, what we have is a witness of 4 people who to frame their story, to present Jesus more as a king. He gives the power and authority as a true king, and the true king of Israel is Yahweh. He gives authority over the creation. So when he sends his disciples, what he says is, okay, go into the world, so chapter 16 from 15 and following. 15 to 18. Okay? Go into the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. That kind of has resemblance, has connection with what we hear in Matthew. Yes, in Matthew 28. Go and, do disciples of all the nations. Okay? All of that. So go to all the world, proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. The only difference is, here it's not only humans who are talked about. Okay, so you proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. I do not think that we need to go and talk to cats. But what I'm going to is how we treat our pets and all of the creation is a reflection. Do we believe in the gospel or not? Have we been touched with the Holy Spirit or not? That's important. So I'm not that developed as, St. Francis, who were singing the songs to, the sun and all of that. Not worshiping the sun, he was not doing that. He was doing right. But I think our relationship should be more in the respect to what, to the dominion that God has given to us, as we sing or said today in our psalm, Psalm 8. Okay, now, whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, and whoever does not believe will be condemned. Now, see the paradox of this theology. To be saved, you believe and baptized. What's the criteria to be condemned? Lack of belief. Okay? So where's baptism? Baptism is important. Baptism is vital. If you believe, why you don't want to be baptized? Okay? So if a person had a chance to be baptized, believed, had a chance to be baptized, but rejected that, that's kind of interesting and somewhat suspicious thing. Why you don't want to be baptized? Do you really believe? But the criteria for condemnation is not the lack of baptism, but the lack of faith. Okay? So it's two important arguments that we need to keep in mind when we do our witness to our people. Okay? So if we are talking about helping them to understand that they might end up in hell, so to not end up in hell is you need to believe, but to be in heaven you need to believe and be baptized. Okay? So it's like it's a normal life trajectory, I would say. If you are conceived, you're going to be born, and the baptism is your birth. Okay? So that's an important thing. Now, where I'm going to, that's all kind of was just introduction. And these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will cast out demons, they will speak in new tongues, they will pick up serpents with their hands, and they will drink any deadly potion, and it will not hurt them. They will lay their hands on the sick, and they will recover. Okay? Two things about that. Thing number one, it's going to be kind of your homework to prepare you for the book of Acts. Try to go through the book of Acts and see how all of those signs are fulfilled. We see how Paul releases people from demonic possession. We see how they speak new tongues, new languages. That will be a better translation. We see how at the very end of his journey, he grabs a snake and everybody and he's bitten by a snake, but he just shakes it off and keeps going. And everybody were like, oh, that's the Hermes, that's the Greek gods came to us and all that. No, we are just servants of the Lord, and so on and so forth. So we can see how all of those things are fulfilled in the book of Acts. Again, putting the company of Peter and Mark and Paul and Luke together. They tell one story, even though with a little bit different accents. Now the question is, are those signs were given for the apostolic age of the church, like within 70 AD, or they are still valid today? In the United States, we still have a church-like a group of people who actually test their faith by being bitten by snakes.
Oh.
Okay? And if you get sick after that, that's kind of suspicious. But if you do not want to be bitten by a snake, that's definitely you are not a believer whatsoever. I don't have a solid answer, but for me, it's more silly than anything else. I think those signs are given that if something harmful will attack you, God will find the means to preserve you. It does not mean that you need to go into this kind of dangerous situation. Okay? It's like, God will save you if the house is burning, and God will try to, send a rescue team and they will pull you out. It does not mean that if you see a fire, you need to walk into that stuff and say, claim that the Lord will protect you. So that's the things. I'm not sure that all of those gifts are in the full measure are relevant for today yet. We do pray, we lay our hands, and people are released from demonic possessions. If you remember the rite of baptism and confirmation, especially with an adult, there is a question. Do you denounce the devil? And the person says yes, hopefully says yes. It would be very odd if we were a baptized person who will say no. I still want to cling to the devil, but I want to be baptized. That's kind of not going to work. But so we live in a little bit different world, but we still see how those things are reflected one way or another. Maybe not in the 100% parallel to what we have in the book of Acts, but we see how that is implemented into our life. Now, a couple more things. Now I lost my glasses. Goodness gracious. In the other parts of the Bible, we see an important parallel with the Gospel of Mark. In the Gospel of Mark, when Peter confesses Christ, let's go back there just for a second. There is an important thing. It says that Jesus strictly charged them not to tell anybody. And therefore, scholars come up with a theory of what is called messianic secret. It's not necessarily a bad term. What it means is, and it's only in the Gospel of Mark. In the Gospel of Mark, he wants them to know some things, but wait until they will see the fulfillment through death and resurrection, and only then he charges them to share the good news. Okay? So it's kind of, I don't know, Mark builds a suspense to the fuller realization of what happens at the very end of the Gospel of Mark. Okay? So I don't want to compare him to what was his name in the movies? Psycho and Birds and whatever that. Not important. Whatever. I'm gonna get stuck.
Which movie?
Psycho, Birds, other things. Hitchcock. Yeah. So it's not that. But something like this, we need to understand that those guys, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and all the Old Testament writers, were really prolific writers. So sometimes we make a mistake saying that, Hitchcock built a suspense, therefore we can see Mark builds a suspense. Okay? No. It's because we see it in the Bible. And we see that they knew about those kind of things. They knew how to build their story to deliver the important message. And therefore, our modern guys, if they're smart enough, they kind of pick up from the real source and use it for their artistry, either for movies or for books or for other reasons. But the thing is, we need to see how this gospel secret, or the secret that he is the Messiah, is realized in Paul's letters. If we'll go for a second to Philippians 2. Philippians 2, verses 6 to 11. Or we'll begin with 5. So Philippians 2, okay? Have this mind among yourself, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. So, to understand how this human is an incarnation of God, it's not easy to comprehend. It's not easy to grasp. And that's what Mark builds on when Jesus tells them, keep it as a secret. Let it stay with you. Let it settle down. Let it sink in. I know recently that phrase was quite popular, as a meme. But so let it sink in. But then when something will happen, when you will see this death and resurrection thing, you will be able to understand. So it's not something to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of man, and being found in the human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, and in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So this idea of Jesus as the King, as the Christ, who is glorified by God. So he empties himself. He goes through this experience of death and resurrection, and therefore he is glorified. So that's an important thing that we see in Mark and in other passages. And also, as I've talked already about the signs of the kingdom, we can see them here. We can see them in the book of Acts, but also in other apostolic writings, like in the letter of James. And we have couple hymns that are built, like in the 518, we have a whole stanza by all your saints in warfare. By all your saints in warfare is an interesting hymn. We have a first stanza, like the beginning one, and the third, the last one. And then depending of the day of the liturgical year, depending of the saint, which is the calendar observes, there are inserts. And we have a whole stanza 15, which is dedicated to Saint Mark Evangelist. And of course, as we talked about this death and resurrection and becoming the king, the lift high the crosses would be very relevant to the Gospel of Mark. So, Gospel depicts the disciples who do not fully believe, even after resurrection, but after ascension will go and preach everywhere under guidance of the Lord. So, that's the Gospel of Mark. Any questions or comments?